With the help of Hashem, we are learning Moed Katan Daf Chav Zayin. We left off on Daf Chav Vav Amid Beis, 7 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We are in middle, learning a Braisa. The Braisa is going to teach us more details regarding Hilchois Kiriya. We're going to go back to the Mishnah that speaks about Kfiyas Hamita and correct Kfiyas Hamita, like Atifas Haroish, like Choilsin. These are the three practices that we do not do nowadays, but in the times of Chazal, people that were in mourning would overturn their beds. So first, we're going to go back to the specific detail that Kfiyas Hamita was not done, and the people and the visitors that came did not sit on these overturned beds. It's connected specifically to the Avelim. We're going to learn about an exception with a very deep concept. The Gemara is going to want to know on Daf Chav Zayin, from when are the beds overturned? Many understand the Gemara is really going to be asking, when does Shiva begin? At death, Oinen, the state of Aninus begins. Shiva begins from, now we always quote from Stimas Hagoylol, we will see that there's actually a Machloikas Tanoim. We're going to have a Mishnah that's going to speak about details of this meal that we call Su'udas Havra'ah. The word Havra'ah means food that the mourners do not eat from their own, whether it's the first meal. Some people understand that's the first day or for the concluding part of the day after the burial, but food is brought for them. And then we're going to learn details about how we bury on Chol HaMoed, with all of the differences, because it's Chol HaMoed, as we'll see, we don't eulogize, and other things that are not done because it's Chol HaMoed. Now, don't forget, Chavre, if someone passed away over Yom Tiv, B'chlal, Shiva will only begin after Yom Tiv, but you bury as soon as possible. And we're going to have today the very important sequence of events of how the minhag concerning many details of the burial and a little bit an extension regarding the Shiva changed over time, in order to give honor primarily to the poor. In other words, the way we bury, the simplicity of what we do during the burial, and a lot of credit is given to Rabban Gamliel, as we'll see in today's daf, is in order to facilitate burial, to make it, amongst other things, less expensive. We'll speak about the irony of nowadays. Now you use the cheapest of materials and it went back to be vital expensive. But there's an evolution, very interesting details, how there was a time that the concept of an open casket was a Jewish minhag, and how Chazal changed that, and many other details. Chavre, let's start on Daf Chavav Amid Beis again. We're in the middle of a Braisa, and we're going to start 7 lines from the bottom of the Amid. Some of these details were already quoted above. Says the Braisa, and for those of us, I have the letter Ayin here, right before the part of the Braisa that we are up to. And the Braisa says, V'koiden, that one will rend one's garments, al chaviv al chamoiset, for the passing of one's father-in-law and mother-in-law, not because we are paskening, like we learned above, that for the Shniyim, you're chayiv to mourn. No, but because of a kibud that we want to give for our wives, the way we show kavod for our wives is by rending the garments for the passing of, God forbid, her father or mother, which is a very healthy approach. Sometimes people don't like their in-laws or they don't get along with the in-laws. And it's not about the in-laws. It's about giving kavod. If a person respects his wife, which he should, one of the best ways to demonstrate the kavod you give to your wife is by honoring her parents. Tani, we learned the Evel Rabasi. And we already said that we have the braisas of what the Gemara calls the large laws of mourning. We call that Nesechtes Simchais, that we have printed in the back. I think it's of Nesechtes Avodah Zarah. It's somewhere towards the end. It says over there in the braisa, Avel, a mourner, lo yaniach tinok al cheko, should not hold the child on his or her lap, because it's going to bring a certain amount of, let's say, frivolity to the holder, to the mourner. And he will be disgraced. Now, let's not confuse, Chavre, if a parent of a very young child is, God forbid, sitting Shiva, the Braisa is not saying that you, parent, cannot hold your child. That's not what it means. But sometimes a Zayda is sitting Shiva, and then the grandchild comes in, and it's not befitting when you're sitting. The concept of Shiva is sit and mourn for the person who passed away. I know that, thank God, every person also has brachas in their lives, and no greater bracha than family, and then, nephews and nieces and grandchildren. But at the moment of Shiva, you're to hold your grandchildren. It makes so much sense. No, that you completely checked out of mourning when you're holding your grandchild or you're holding a child. Now, if the child needs you, that's something else.
What if it brings comfort to him?
It's not about comfort. No, it's not. It's a distraction. Okay, that's what the Brisa says. It makes sense. It becomes a whole different topic. It becomes about the child rearing and not about mourning. And said now, end the Brisa. Now we're going back to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah said the ein mavrin alamita is a kufais, that people that would come and participate in the Sudas Havra'ah, which is not our minig today. Today, the Sudas Havra'ah is eaten only by the Avelim. Then everyone came to join. So the Mishnah need to say, Gesundheit hate, you can join, but make sure that you sit on an upright bed. Only the mourners sit on the overturned beds. So Tanach Rabbanan, we learned in a Brisa, a person who's visiting the house of a mourner. So here we have an exception that if the visitor and the mourner are real chavedim, Rashi says, gasboy in this context is not the gasboy as you have it sometimes between a husband and a wife. Here they're very close. Yavru al mitos kafuyos. Then the visitor can sit down on the overturned bed. The imla, but if they're not gasboy, if they don't have that level of friendship, yavru al mitos kufuyos, then the visitor should sit on an upright bed. Says the Gemara story that Rava Isra Bei Milsa. We already had this expression many times. Isra means bad, which means something not good happened to Rava, which means Rava lost a relative. Therefore, he was sitting and he was now eating the Sudas Havra'ah. And Olagabe Abba Bar Marta, which is also known as Abba Bar Manyume. Rava, in reverence of Abba who came to visit him, Zikif, he turned the bed back in the right position. So Abba should be able to sit down. Notes Rava was Mishamesh Abba, but making sure that Abba sits on a normal bed. Abba Bar Marta, who felt he's very close to Rava, Kafe turned the bed over. Because we just learned that even though it says in the Mishnah, the people that are visiting should not sit on this overturned bed. But if you're gasboy, if you're a good chaved, then sit on the low stool. And Amar, so Rava said, Kama, the last line, Kama, Leis beidata lahait surba midrabanan. How lacking of sense, how lacking of understanding is this young Talmudic scholar referring to Abba, because this is so important psychologically. There's no doubt that in moments of great joy, and God forbid, if there is a tragedy, in moments of great tragedies, when people participate with the others, the friendship gets stronger. But for this din, we don't want for the person who is visiting the Avel to say, you see, now I'm buddy. So let me already sit on the overturned bed. No. If you were a friend prior to the morning, then you sit on the low stool. So it says, don't use, so to say, this friendship, which is being born out of tragedy, to justify you sitting on such a lowly stool. Okay. Tanach Rabbanan, says the Gemara, we learned in a Brisa. We're going to focus a little bit on the halacha that a mourner may not do malacha, completely not related to the definition of malacha b'negei Shabbos Yom Tov Chol HaMoed, but it has more to do with physical labor and commerce. That at least if there isn't a David ha'aved, right, we refrain from doing work. Now this person is traveling, and while they're traveling, in between the lines, they found out that one of their 7 close relatives passed away, which means they are now in mourning. Daf Chav Zayin. So if he's able, listen, if the guy is able to suspend his entire trip, nowadays the world is more modern. Nowadays it's easier to travel. Nowadays it's shaykh for you to stop the whole trip. Then it was very difficult until you made the trip, during the trip. So if you can suspend, if you can diminish, then you should do it. You should make an effort to express your mourning also in this halacha that it's also b'malacha, at least theoretically. But v'im lav, if now you are already in the middle of the trip, says the Brisa, yigalgeli mohem taiches Rashi, that if you are working with other people, then you can continue doing everything that you're doing. In other words, if you're not with other people, Rashi infers, if you're not with a chabura, then you may not do it. You can't say, I'm already in the middle of my trip. But we're trying to find out that if you are with other people, so it's not only you doing their work, that will be one way to be mekel. Now, we mentioned many times above the word stimas hagoylo, right? That's sof, that's samach sof, sesimas or stimas hagoylo. There's really a machlokes rishonim that's quoted many times. What is stimas hagoylo? Stimas hagoylo, according to Rashi, is when they would seal the lid on top of the casket. And actually, as we will learn in today's daf, and this amid all the way in the bottom, that there were times that it was in Jewish tradition to have an opened casket prior to burial. And then at one point, they would close the casket and no one is opening it up. That is how Rashi interprets stimas hagoylo. Tosfos interprets stimas hagoylo when the person who passed away is not only put in the ground or in the crypt, but they would seal it. Today, we would say they would cover it. The truth is, they're not arguing. There were different ways of burying someone who passed away. Once the person is completely covered over, that's considered the end. That's considered stimas hagoylo. And we paskin that from that moment on is when we go into the hilchas avelos, prior to which the person is called an oinen. Really, it's a machlokes tanoim. That's the way we will learn pshat right now. Tanach Rabbanan, the second line from the top. From when do the beds need to be overturned? Again, many Rishonim learn that the Braisa is just using the overturning of beds as one of the many examples of halachas that do not apply to the oinen, only applies to a novel. So it's as if the Braisa is asking, okay, when does Avelos begin? So it says the Braisa, first opinion, which is more, we can say it's more chomer, because there are certain dinim that you don't put on an oinen. It's like a chumrah to begin avelos earlier. That's the way I understand it. And Rabbi Eliezer, who is normally the machmer, says, the moment the body leaves the house. People didn't pass away in hospitals. People passed away in their homes. Once you take the body out of the house, even though many things still have to happen, you have to make a tahara, v'chulei, you're already considered avelim. So when the body goes out of the house, turn the beds upside down. However, Rabbi Yeshua says, no, mishi yisosem hagoylo, from when the body is completely sealed. Again, we paskin, just to know nowadays, it's not only from when they cover the body in the ground, but really what we ideally should do, while we are in the Beis HaChaim, prior to the Avelim saying Kaddish, is that we make sure that when they put the earth back in the ground, some of it goes higher than the adjacent area. There's like a pile of earth, we put stones, ideally all the way around the area that was dug over. So even if the earth would have been put back together perfectly, one would see exactly, it's called Suras HaKever. That is how we do it right now. Here in America, I didn't see it that much. I know in Brazil, we were very makbid. To make a burial, at least where the head is, they would put 5 stones. Prior to the Kaddish, in Eretz Yisrael, by Tzvika's mother, they were very medagdek to surround it fully with stones, and every stone touched the other. So you have what they call it Suras HaKever. But this is all from many different Rishonim that interpreted the words Stimas HaGoyel or Mishiyasasam HaGoyel. And again, let's learn pshat that the machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua isn't only regarding overturning the beds. Some do learn that way. No, it's regarding when does Avelus begin? When does Shiva begin? When are you no longer an Oina? And now the Gemara says, Maisa Shemeis Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken. Many say that this cannot be Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken because of the other Tanoim that lived in a different eretz. Rabbi Gamliel from Yavne, that Kivin Shiyatzim Pesach Beisai. The moment after his passing and he was taken out of the house, Omar Lahem Rabbi Eliezer, which was his opinion to the immediate relatives, Kfu Mitoy Sechem. Turn your beds over. Now, once they properly buried Rabbi Gamliel, Kiven Shenistam Hagoyel, so then Rabbi Yeshua told the immediate family members, Kfu Mitesechem, turn the beds over. So Amrullah, so they responded to Rabbi Yeshua, we already did it. Kfar Kofinu al Pi Zaken. Zaken means Rabbi Eliezer. No, there's a machlokes that actually, this is so interesting because until today, by a burial, you have different rabbis saying different things. Don't think it's a new thing. Do this now, do this then, do this later, do like this, do like that. You have this already in the times of the Tanoim. there are different nuances, and every Tana was advocating his opinion. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in a Braisa. Another very important din. We don't mourn Bifaresya on Shabbos. So whoever sadly already sat Shiva. So exactly from when Erev Shabbos can the Avelim say, okay, now we're getting into Shabbos mode? From when? Says the Braisa. Min mincha olamayla. Machloikes rishonim. What's mincha? Mincha gedoyla. We paskin that it's mincha katana. Mincha katana. Let's say around 2.5 hours, guys, before Shabbos. That's what we're gonna do. Okay. That's when the Avelim. Now, some people, remember Rabbi Reichik telling me that min mincha olamayla is if you need to. If you need to. If you don't need to. It's not. Don't feel that it's Erev Shabbos, like after Chatzos, I'm good. The time that you need before Shabbos to get ready, when I was sitting for my father, I needed 15 minutes, 20 minutes. You understand?
But at the same time used for the shower.
Okay, you take a shower, you put on your big day Shabbos. In other words, you don't have to wait until it's Shabbos to put on your big day Shabbos. But the point is, it's not like right after Chatzos. Amar Barhuna, Afal Pikein, even though you give Ben Amin Cholomayla. So you're taking a shower. So you're putting on big day Shabbos. But but to properly sit, no longer on the low stool, wait until it's night. He's getting up Sunday. So many people feel this, I'm getting up Sunday. We paskin like Abba Shol, right? That means you get up Sunday after Shachris. So if Sunday is the last day, Shabbos, you were already sitting normal. You were dressed normal. But I'm going to turn all the beds over, Matzah Shabbos, just for a few hours? Yes. Even though you're getting up in one day, which means in the morning, nevertheless, you return the beds over. The last narrow line. At the end of the narrow line. This concept, again, we don't do it nowadays because the Goyim made fun or because they suspected us of practicing sorcery. But when we were, the concept of turning over a bed, which also served as today we sit in the low stools, but it was much more than that. All of the beds in the home were turned over. Kfiyas hamita doesn't only mean the bed that you're sleeping on. Every bed in that house is going to be turned over. And and they are ba'asar. They're not in the room where the person passed away. They're not in the room that you're sitting shiva. Your kid's bedroom, every bed is turned over. Furthermore, you would think maybe that's a din only in the house where the person passed away. And there are certain unique. Like ideally, shiva should be sat in the home, not where the nifter lived. Ideally, where they passed away. In most cases today, people pass away in a hospital. But people say, in the house of the deceased. Even better if they passed away in a home, to sit shiva in that home. So this din of kfiyas hamit and every bed is not a din in the bias. It's a din on the oven. So even if the avelim are not sitting shiva in the house where they passed away, they're sitting in other homes. Or one of them passed away, and the brothers are not sitting together. That's the meaning. Every brother, the 4 remaining brothers, are sitting in their home, not in the house where there was a passing. Every brother should turn over all of their beds. However, here are exceptions. If there was a bed that was designated to put kalim, not for people to sleep, it was like a shelf. People stored things on it. That ain't tzarich l'chafos. Dargosh. What's the dargosh? That will be the next couple of lines. It's an unusual type of bed, as we'll see soon. That is also the exception, but it's a partially exception. You don't have to flip it. You don't have to turn it completely over. Elo zoikva. Zoikva means if this is a bed, so you can turn it like this. So instead of having the legs facing the ceiling, which is what you would normally want, so they're facing the wall. That's enough. Rashbag, Rav Shimon Gamliel says, Dargosh. No, you don't. I get it. You don't have to turn it over. You don't even have to stand it up. Mater escarbito. There were loops. So normally, as we spoke out already many times, they had a bed frame, and they would use ropes to go lengthwise and widthwise. Those ropes would actually go over the bedposts. They don't look that nice. And then on those ropes, they would put the hay that they would sleep on, the mattress. Dargosh was made where there was a sheet. We'll see soon. It was a leather sheet. That people slept on it. And the way they connected that sheet to the bedposts was it fit inside the posts. And there were little holes inside the walls of the posts through which they would put a rope. So there would be a loop that wouldn't go over the post. It would go inside the post and it would grab onto the sheet. So he says, untie the loops and let the sheet fall. That's enough of Kfiyas Hamita. So says Rashbak. Let's read the words again. Dargosh, materas karbitov, untie the loops. Vahu goes on the sheet, which was the mattress that people slept on. Okay, very nice. Now, what's a dargosh? Approach number one that will be refuted. Says Ula arsa de gada, the beds that are in a home for mazel. Interesting concept, which means that people would have a bed that no one would use. And they called it the mazel dika bed, or some people worded it that since God is sending a malach to protect my home, so I'm having a bed for the malach that no one would use. Huh? All right, I remember that in our home in Brazil, Rabbi Reichik had a chair that he sat on when he visited, and no one should not dare even to hang their jacket on it. That's Rabbi Reichik's chair. So, I know certain Hasidim had a chair for the Rebbe, I think, in their home. So something I'll say. And that brought mazel. So that's the dargish. Since no one ever uses it, that's the point. That's why you don't have to turn it over. Amalei Abba. No. That's not the meaning. Elamata regarding a king, the Tanan, Kol ha'amam sumam al aretz. That when people come to visit the king who's in mourning, normally the Avelim are sitting low and everyone else is sitting on a higher chair. But by a melech, everyone sits on the ground, and the king will not recline because of the covet of Malchus on the dargosh. Doesn't make sense. Is there anything? No one would sit on this arsa de gada. Gada is from God. God is mazel tov. No one would sit on it. What? And now that he's a mourner, the king sits on it? Doesn't make sense. The Gemara says, yes, it does. Yes, it does. Maskav Larabashi, that this maskav is an answer. My kushya. For example, mida dahava, when it comes to eating and drinking. Before the king became a mourner, the king never ate other people's food. We never fed the king. We never gave the king a drink. But now for Sudas Havra, whether it's the first meal, whether it's the first day after the burial, there are certain nehugin that is done by a mourner that is never done prior to him being a mourner. Ella, the problem, the question on Ula, Akasha. And here goes really, it's the Tanya. It says in Abraisa, quoting the same halacha, that you don't have to turn over this dargish type of bed, but you can stand it upright. Now, if dargosh means this, it's a bed like any other bed. The people in the home designated this bed for good mazel, but it's a normal bed. Hatanya, we learned in a brayso, when you turn over this din of kfiyas hamito, so it can't mean it's just a regular bed that was designated for good luck, and no one is going to lay on it. No one's going to use it. The Gemara rejects the question. That's not a question. My kasha. Right? The beds that were designated for utensils in those days, don't think it was a special type of bed. It was a bed like any other bed. But since it was designated for Kalim, you don't have to turn it over. The Tanya. So if this mita was designated for Mazel Tov, you also don't have to turn it over. Ella, but we're going to refute Ula. Daragosh is not this Mazel bed. Ella, ikasha hakasha. When it says that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Oimed, as we learned above, that he says even more lenient. All you need to do to the dargash is mata karbitov, that you have to untie the loops. Vahu, and the sheet and the mattress falls by itself. If it's a bed that was just designated lemazel toiv, no one uses it. My karbitin islay doesn't have loops. It's an ordinary bed, and therefore chevra ula is refuted. That's not dargash. What is dargash? Ella, when Ravin, Kevin woke up over here. That's already the answer. You're skipping ahead. Elo kiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came from the Holy Land, Amar le'omid Rabbanan. So one of the rabbis told Ravin, and Rav Tachlifa Bar Marava is his name. And the reason why he knew the answer, the Gemara explains more than the other Amoraim, because this Rav Tachlifa, the Havashchiach Beshuka Di Gildoi, he frequented the leather makers' fairs, markets. He knew leatherware, and he said, "I know what that is." He was medayik from the words of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. It was a bed that if you untie the loops, it falls. It must be arsa de tzalo, a bed made out of leather. Now the posts were made out of wood. Made out of leather means that it's not like today you have a box spring and then you have the mattress. That's a normal bed. There, the box springs was ropes. And then they put something on top. The Argash was the whole bed was this was the bed. And Taka, it was connected to the bedposts with different types of loops. Not strings that went all the way across. And indeed, itmanami amar Rabbi Yirmiyah dargesh seirugoy mitoichai. Its loops or its ties or its knots or its bindings goes inside the height of the bedpost. If you see a picture, you'll see that. Mita, the normal bed, the way they would make beds is that they wouldn't have holes inside the bedposts. Seirugai al gabay. Yeah, you needed ropes. The ropes went all the way in the width, all the way in the length, and when they came to the post, it went over it. It went around it. Okay. So that's the Darvish. Amar Rabbi Yaakov Baracha. Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi. The halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, which is a kula. In other words, we're just making things easier. Yeah, if you can't release the mattress, then ain't beredi, you got to turn the beds upside down. But if you can release and have them, the inner part of the bed drop, collapse, that's kfiyas hamit. Says the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha Amar Rabasi. Mita a bed. It's giving a pashta case. We had this so much in Masechta Sukkah. Many people had beds that had canopies on top of them. Now, we learned sometimes there were 4 posts that went up. If you have 4 posts going up, you can turn the beds upside down. I know it's going to be meshuga, but at least it's gonna stand upside down. What about the beds that had like this teepee? There were only 2 posts going up, so the top wasn't the tefach. That was advantageous when it came to that in the sukkah. But that you can't flip that upside down because there's only 2 legs. There's no, you need a minimum of 3. So what do you do with that? So says the Gemara that mita bed shenak liteha yoitzim. What do you do? In other words, the double posts protrude, not quadruple posts. So what do you do? Zoikva is mamish the way we learned in the Braisa. According to one opinion by the Dargash, you stand it up. It's also like you're turning it up and vidayoin, and that's enough. And you don't have to flip it, and then it's going to fall on the side. You don't have to go ad kedei kach. Okay, Kano Rabbana. To clarify more about Kfiyas Hamita. Kfiyas Hamita is not for the Avail to be uncomfortable. If that would have been the case, I can say right now, it would only be his bed. But we began today learning it's every bed in the house. Another example, what happens if a mourner says, I'm not going to sleep in the bed. I'm really going to beat myself up. I'm going to sleep on the ground. You're not, enjoy, but you're not yoitzik kfiyas hamita. That's the point. Says the Braisa, Yashan al gabe akisi. If a mourner says, I'm going to sleep on a chair, which is very uncomfortable, or I'm going to sleep al gabe udiyane gedoyla. They had these mortars. People had mortars in their home, and it was large enough that if you turn it upside down, it's like a makeshift bed, less comfortable. Or I'm going to sleep on the ground. I'm yoitze uncomfortable. Says the Braisa, lo yotze yedei chayvase. It's not uncomfortable. There was an inyan of turning over your bed. And what did we learn before? That since people are procreated on beds, we have this in Moed Katan, and God made us in His image. And when a human being is put on the ground, they deteriorate. Most people, unless the person is a tzaddik gamur. So there is a overturning of tzelem elokim. So we turn over the bed, and that's why it's a din on the bed. And even if you're not sleeping on that bed, turn over the bed.
Anything corresponding to this?
No. But you see, I just want to point out, I know this, for some reason, I have to wrap my head around it, but you see how lenient we are. No, it's not only that since the Goyim suspected us of doing kishuv, we took that out. we didn't even make an effort to replace it with anything because the approach by Hilchas Avelus is to be lenient. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shaloi Kiyam. Why not? Explains Rabbi Yochanan, like we just said. It's not about discomfort. It's about the halacha of turning your bed over. We learned in a brayso regarding the upkeep of the base ovel that you are allowed to be machabdim. You can sweep. You don't have to sit in uncomfortable uncleanliness. You can sweep the home. Umar bitzin. Then they used to have earthen floors, and every now and then they would sprinkle wine, ideally, first they would sprinkle water to lower the dust. And if to give it a good aroma, they would normally use wine. You can do that in the house of an ovel. And you can rinse the ka'aris, the plates, the kaisis, the cups, the tzlichis, the jars, the bottles. No, it's the kalim that are used for eating, clean them, the base of ovel. However, because that's called getting rid of dirt. No, it's cleanliness, hygiene is permitted. Going beyond hygiene, pleasure, that's prohibited. Mugbar, it was common that they used to burn certain incense. They would burn it under the laundering of clothing. But mugmar was a certain product that would give a good aroma. You don't burn the mugmar. You don't bring psamim in the house of an ovel. Hold on. That we don't ala mugmar. You don't make a bracha. You don't make a bracha on psamim in the house of an ovel. Stop for a moment. Our minig, just to know, for Avelim, God forbid, over Shabbos, is that they do make a bracha on psamim. But that's a whole topic. Here, this Bryce is not speaking about Havdalah. Normally you would bring something that smells good. That you don't make a bracha. Now, not making a bracha implies you can bring it. Just don't make a bracha. Asks the Gemara, Baruch hu d'loi mevarchin, hasu yemaisi. And there's a whole question. So how can you smell it if you don't make a bracha? Because bringing it doesn't mean that they would smell it. Smelling it means you bring it to your nose. Like nowadays, when you walk by a place and there's a good aroma, you don't make a bracha. So you bring it. So in other words, could you bring something that upgrades the smell in the house of an ovel or not? And the Gemara gives a gavaldic solution. Loikashi. That in the room where the ovel is sitting, meaning not where people visit him, in his bedroom, no psamim, no mugmar. In the house, but beis hamenachamim, in the living room today, many people come and visit. Guys, they didn't have showers. And the Frenchies today choose not to take showers, even though they have showers. And how do they resolve it? They resolve it by putting on their stinkachs, they put another stinkachs. They call that a French bath. And they think it's good. So in other words, when you walk into a home and it stinks, so you want to bring psamim to resolve the problem. If you think it resolves it, that's allowed. Because it's like, we call that deodorant. It's like you can put on deodorant, but you can't put on perfume or what's it called, cologne. Why? Because even though the deodorant, some people also stinks, not the unscented. Yeah, you scent it, but at least it's there to take away bad. Taking away bad, surmira is allowed. The asay toiv is also, yeah.
What about the Sephardic customers sending spices that make you get bracha?
So I don't know about that minute. So I'm just Kevin is saying that he witnessed Dafka bringing some. Okay, I haven't seen it. And by the way, if there's any other opinion anywhere that says it's allowed, then we'll be lenient. I just know that when it comes to psamim, some people, they don't make a bracha on Havdalah, and just we do. We make a bracha on psamim. Okay, says the Mishnah. Ein moilichin lebeis ha'avel. When people would bring food for the first meal, again, called Sudas Havra'ah. Really, this is not only about Sudas Havra'ah. This is about, we want to make sure that the nehugin, the practices that's happening in a house of a mourner has to be downplayed. Because even though some people can afford to do things fancier, some people cannot. This is the sugya. When food is brought, don't bring food not on a tabla. Tabla is a tray. I mean, how else would you bring it? It was simple as basket. Don't bring it on a tray. Don't bring it on a iskutla, a large bowl. Don't bring it on a kanoin, a large basket. Ella bisalim. Bring food into the house of an ovel in the simplest ways. Now we're going to come back to that in the Gemara. Second topic in the Mishnah, Chol HaMoed. Yeah, if someone passed away on Chol HaMoed and buried on Chol HaMoed, or passed away on Yom Tov and buried on Chol HaMoed, the Shiva only begins later, but the burial is ASAP. But since the burial is happening on Chol HaMoed, says the Mishnah, if that's the case, we don't mourn as much. Birchas Avelim was said during that Su'udas Habra'ah, again, that then everyone came to participate. And they would make a bracha, and the bracha would end, Baruch Menachem Avelim. So they don't make that bracha if it's on Chol HaMoed. No, we don't make that bracha now, David. Avol oimdim b'shura. The shura, which is what we do now. Now we make the shura in the Beis HaChaim itself, not outside the Beis HaChaim. And now again, everything changed. Now, the Menachamin, the consolers, are the ones that stand, and the Avelim walk through. It used to be the opposite, mamish. But anyways, that is done. Umenachamin. Now you know what says the Mishnah. One pshat is we have a chiyuv to be menachem and avel. The avel is only going to sit down after Yom Tov. Whoever stood in the shura and during the shura said hamakim yenachem eschem is exempt from their obligation of nichum avelim. We're not speaking about socially exempt. We're speaking about halachically exempt. So during the rest of Chol HaMoed, the mourners are not even sitting shiva. But since you were there by the kvura and you stood in the shura, that's one pshat of Paiter. And another pshat is the opposite, is that you make this quick. Many people linger on in the Beis HaChaim and everyone walks over to the Avelim. So we send everyone home because it's Chol HaMoed. That's another pshat. Another thing.
It's like a one-time deal. Like you go to the
Halachically, yeah. Halachically, yes. Socially, not. Socially, you can go as many times as you want. But if I say, I want to fulfill the mitzvah of Nicham Avelim. So even though the Avel didn't even begin Shiva, but since I stood in the Shura, I fulfilled the mitzvah. Now, Ein manichin esamita barachoiv, on Chol HaMoed, mamish before the burial, one of the minhagim is that you don't walk straight. They would put the bed down and then would give a eulogy. Then they would pick it up and walk a little bit more and give another. You don't even put it down. Nowadays, we don't put it down, but we make stops. Never by women. We don't make the ma'amodos by nashim. We say Yoshev B'Seiser, and if it's a day that you say Tachnun, then you go until the pasuk Ki Malachav, and you say Ki, and then you start from the beginning Ki Malachav. With all that all came from this. They would put so on Chol HaMoed, don't put the bed down. Shaloi lahagid, that's a hesper, because when they would put the bed down, they would make another eulogy. And now finally says the Mishnah, a woman who's being buried should never be put down because of her dignity. And we will see Chevra next daf, which is really on top of Chav Ches, like every time. It's like Chumash Rashi, Mishnah, and the Gemara. It's not the way it sounds. It means that if a woman passed away during childbirth, which means that there's a lot of body fluids that might be oozing out of her body, so to be machabeter, people shouldn't see that, you go straight to the burial. But if a woman did not pass away in childbirth, and there's no chashash that there's going to be some uncomfortability because of visible body fluids, then we'll see in the Gemara, then you could put a woman down on the way to the burial to give more cover to her and to give more hesped. Says the Gemara. This is so important what we're learning now. And this is going back to the first din in the Mishnah that was speaking about how you can't even bring to the house of the Avel food in fancy kalim. Downplay everything, make everything simple. If not, you're going to begin a competition. Says the Gemara, but initially, how would people bring food? And you want to be menachem. So what would you do? So if you were wealthy, this is both, the society, not the avelim, the chavedim of the avelim, the wealthy. So they would bring their food because they would have silver baskets or golden baskets. And the aniyim, for them, food was brought. The cheapest, they used to make baskets out of peeled willow twigs. That was the cheapest material, made in China. That's how they would bring it. And what happened? And the poor people felt ashamed. So they made an enactment. This cheapest type of basket should always be the only keli used to bring food into the Beis HaAvel. They would serve drinks. Now, how would they serve drinks? Everything was a big thing. So for Ashirim, they served drinks to the people that came there. Zchuchis Levana either means transparent, glass, which was then very expensive, or it means white glass, certain type of glass that was like very chashuv. And the aniyim, they had the cheaper glass that was called the colored glass. Today, colored glass, is expensive. What do they call that? They put it to some shuls. There's a name for that. But, stained glass. Yeah. Aniyim is baishim, 3 lines from the bottom. So iskino, they made an enactment. I don't care how wealthy you are. You are going to serve drinks in colored glass. Guys, this is amazing. At some point prior to burial, the face of the deceased was uncovered. And they would uncover it because it evokes tsar. And the goal of a hesped is not to make everyone feel good, celebrating life. The goal of the hesped is to make everyone cry. And when people see the person and they understand he's about to or she's about to be buried, it arouses a lot of crying. But when can you uncover a face if there's some dignity, if you're not shaming the person? So poor people that starved, so their countenance, the whole face changes for the worse. And Ani, after he passed away, his face can be black. So it's very demeaning. So the face of the Ani were never uncovered. They starved, they were hungry their whole lives. Their bodies were emaciated, they were very weak, and therefore their countenance after the passing did not look good. So there's a limit. You can say, if it doesn't look good, people are going to become more sad. But don't do that. But the Hoyanim is Baishim. So Iskinu, this is the last line. That everyone who's being buried should always be completely covered. And that's a takon of the Chachamim, which we don't break. Even though certain communities here, from ignorance, they have this open casket, and they like the open casket, and they like to make everyone cry. It's against Jewish tradition. Mizman Hagemara, Mizman from the Tanoim. Next, that in other words, when they carried them out, the bed. Okay, today we have a casket in America. In Eretz Yisrael, there's no casket. In Eretz Yisrael, the person is wrapped in tachrichen. However, the outermost wrapper is a sheet, and what's used is this beer. A beer is like it's 2 side posts with the straps upon which the nifted or the nefteris lays. That's a very inexpensive way of transportation. But the wealthier people will put on a dargash, like we just learned above. Only the aniyim daf chav zayin amud beis were taken out bechalicha with this beer. But again, for hayanim is baishim, they felt inferior and they were ashamed. Hiskinu shiyakel mitzim bechalicha mipnei kavodim shalaniyim. Next, if a person passes away from intestinal issues, which means that there's a likelihood that body gases, etc., might ooze out of the body, which will create a bad odor. So to counter again the bad odor, they would put this type of incense that they lit. So it was giving off a good smell to mask the bad smell, but the living choyle ma'ayim would be ashamed. Now we're beginning. People who had ailments saw, oh man, I stink. You know how I stink? Because you see to the mace, they're trying to mask the smell. It reminds them that they are smelly people. And they got ashamed. So this is interesting. This is, by the way, aniyim also, it's for living, for the mchayla ma'ayim. So iskinu, shiyu manichim tachas hakol, that everyone should have mugmar under them, epnei kvodim shel chayla ma'ayim. I want you to know this is interesting that in Shulchan Aruch, we're not allowed to bring flowers to a funeral. That is because the goyim would bring flowers. Why would the goyim bring flowers? Because they did not insist on making a burial ASAP. And they didn't have refrigeration. So if you delay a burial a few days, oh my God, it smells very bad. It's terrible. So they would mask it by bringing flowers. So this is not here in our Gemara. So we are not allowed to bring flowers. In other words, it's tragic that people here, they have their traditions from their countries of origin that are Goyish traditions, pagan traditions, Muslim traditions, and they convince themselves.
But if it's just to mask the smell, so what's the problem?
So I'm pointing out the interesting.
Gemara says we did that.
So a choyle ma'ayim, even if you bury on the day of the passing, a choyle ma'ayim stinks when they are alive. You understand? It's not about death. So the mugmar, that's the counter, the smell of a cholam ma'ayim is allowed to be put. But anything that's being brought, that's coming to mask the smell because of the delay of the burial, dafka don't bring. To motivate people to bury earlier. Good. But when people are alive, so if a woman is a nida, everything that she had halachic contact with, her kalim, her clothing, her bed, she was matame. And nachtumas mishkav u'moishav. So after they would bury her, they would right away toivel all of the kalim. But the living nidais would be ashamed. So what did they do? Every woman that passes away, we don't know whether she's a nida or not. So toivel the kalim. Similarly by Zavin, for those of us who are learning Perikachat Larambam, that's exactly, we're learning this now in the beginning of Adar Rishon, Tavshem Pei Beis, about the dinam of a Zav. That's Mamash Ar Halachas. That if a person is a Zav, again, a Zav is Matamed like a Nida. So a Zav, they would toivel all of the Kalim that he would, that had halachic contact. And V'hoyu Zav and Chayim is Baishin. And by the way, Tefilla for a Zav is not more chomer than a Nida. By a Nida, she goes into a regular mikvah. A Zav has to go into Mayim Chayim. And people felt uncomfortable. So iskinu shiyamat bilam, guys, the first white line, al gabi hakol. Everyone, there's a passing. All of the things that had contact while they were alive has to go to the mikvah mepnei kavoidam shel zavin chayim. Now, chevra, the kalim that are used for burial, those kalim were never taken to the mikvah because they were continuously used for the next burial. They were coming to mace. We're speaking about the kalim that had contact with the niftar prior to their passing. And then they were ungarbed and they were put, tachrichen was put on them. Verstehst? Weiter. Let's go to expense now. It used to be that burial was so expensive because society demanded that you buy, to be mechaber the mace, more expensive clothing, greater casket. So it became unbearable even more, right? The hoitzah was more than the death. That's how expensive it was. For the people whose money is more precious than their life, it became unbearable. To the point, that relatives of the niftar would drop the remains, the body of the niftar. They would leave it. They would bring it to Beis Din. They would bring it to shul. They would leave it, and they would run away. They couldn't afford to bury it. And he said before he passed away, I want for you to bury me in the cheapest shrouds. I'm the head of the Sanhedrin, Dafke. V'yatza, and he was taken out b'chlei pishtan in linen garments. And v'nohagu ha'amachrav latzais b'chlei pishtan. And not only that, Amar Rav Papa v'ha'idna, now we found garments that are cheaper than klei pishtan. You have coarse canvas, very, very inexpensive garments. They're only worth the zuz. Bury people in that. Now, what did we figure out? We're chachamim. We figured out to have the cheapest casket, which we have, to have the cheapest shrouds, but the prices became just as expensive as the expensive one. That's the chachma that we did. A burial spot today cost mishugana amounts of money, but that took time. But for many years, Rabban Gamliel resolved that. And it's like tragic. There has to be ways to bring the burial expense down if possible. Many communities, many shuls, they buy in a Beis HaChaim. I think the biggest expense today is the plot. That's really the biggest expense. So if a shul buys a plot, then people in the community that cannot afford, I know here in Los Angeles, so Chabad owns a Beis HaChaim, and relative to the other cemeteries, they're very inexpensive, which is a bracha. It's in the realm of possible. I know that here they can do the whole burial with the tahara, with everything for $4,000. That's mamish their expense. Versus $50,000. I mean, people should not know. It's mamish very expensive. People that are alive, many times they should make all of their arrangements for themselves. Many communities had a minig that if someone is sick for 3 days or more, I think that Amar writes it. Someone was sick for 3 days or more, any person already over a certain age. We're going to learn, God willing, in the next daf, what are the ages of then they would go and they would tell him, the community, this is not about you. We tell everyone, once a person will sit for 3 days, by plot and by the tachrichen, and it's such a bracha when a person makes their own arrangements, they take away a lot of financial burden from their children. So if it's a wealthy family and they are bequeathing a lot of money, it's just fine. But for the average person, it's a great thing, Taka, to pay for your plot, to pay for your tachrichen. My mother, for years, forever, she'll have her tachrichen. She has a sheet that the Rebbe used when he went to the mikvah. So she already told us for years. She knows when she's getting buried. She wants this. She wants that. But there's a beauty. There's no burden on the children. And also, some people love living with I'm about to go. I'm about to have more friends there than here. It's a certain mindset, and they live forever.
Also, not having to deal with this while you're in such pain.
I would say to just a counter ticket. On one hand, it takes away a lot of work from the mourners. On the other hand, I witnessed that when people are busy with the preparations of the burial, it's not a distraction. It's a healthy direction because you feel like I'm doing something for the deceased. I'm not just sitting like a goylem. And some people get very busy. Even when things were made ready, you still have to do this and do that. And I don't know, I found there's a bracha, there's a certain, the person is busy, I know by my father, and you felt I'm doing something for my father. I'm being mechabed him. And the truth is that's the real final act of kibbud avayim. I'm not minimizing the kaddish, but when you make preparations for someone else's burial, your mom is helping them. That's the chesed shalemus.
That's a good question. Is all these considerations for the poor, is there any
Other area in halacha, like tuition?
wait.
I don't know.
Is there any connection to the idea that when you broke rapport, it's like being met,
So Ariel is bringing up a good point. It's not just the consideration for the poor. Now we have consideration for nidois, we have considerations for cholam ma'ayim, but he's saying there's a unique that a poor person is taka chashuv kames.
right?
So there's even a greater connection. There's a greater juxtaposition to the poor and to the dead. So it even makes more sense. But I think we get this. The spirit is to be particularly careful when it comes to a burial, that society should keep the expenses down, even though it's going to mean by doing things simpler. That's ultimately the kibbut for everyone. And Gamliel is the one that gets credit for that attitude. Okay, let's hop another few lines. Says the Mishnah. That on Chalamoid, if there's a burial, you don't put the bed on the street. That's only for a commoner, but for a Talmud Chacham, however you define that. Yes, put the bed down and make eulogies. And the Kolchchein, that if a Talmud Chacham is being buried on Chanukah and Purim, which are only rabbinic holidays, unlike Chalamoid, there for sure make eulogies, but only bifanav. But Abel Shalei b'fanav, if the niftar is not there, if the nifteris is not there, then on Chanukah, on Purim, on Cholamoid, even though they're Talmidei Chachamim loy, checking what Eini v'Rav Kahana, he gave a hesped to Rav Zvit in Minarda. But where did Rav Kahana give the eulogy? He gave it in the city called Pulnara. He didn't give it b'fanav on Cholamoid. So the Gemara gives Amar Rav Papi. That's different because Rav Kahana just found out that he passed away. He just found out that Rav Zvit passed away. Yom Shmuel have a fun of dummy, and it was considered as if he was in his presence. I know it's a bit early. I got to run. We're going to stop over here. There's plenty of time. You have 2 more daf. It's going to fit. So the next daf, Sunday morning, fascinating, sad, but fascinating about the conversations with the Malach Hamavas. The Malach Hamavas das is going to be Rav Koyach. I know it sounds a little bit strange. And like this, because the final daf we'll learn both Sunday will begin the second daf on daf Chav Ches Amud Beis on the Mishnah. And God willing, Be'ezras Hashem will get. Now the beauty is we're going to end Avelus. And what's the next Masechta? Chagiga. So it's Mamash, it's Azav, the Yehovah.
We start Chagiga Monday, Rabbi?
Have it to be continued.
Rabbi, Monday?
Is this the main source of halachot for
Rabbi, what's the hemshech?
Oh man, I hope this got recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
Huh?
Rosh wrote all the halachas.
All right, this did not get recorded. No, it's okay. It got it. I went on this. It happens always. This is Altamyces.
Thank you, Rabbi.